Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into a massive question, one that's all over the news. What should actually happen with those hundreds of billions of dollars in Russian state assets, the ones frozen in Western banks?
Yeah, it's a huge topic. So our mission here, looking at the sources you've shared, and these include views from MPs in the UK and Ukraine, plus a former UK ambassador, is to sort of unpack the arguments both for and against seizing these funds to help Ukraine.
Exactly. And these aren't just numbers on a page. The sources make it clear we're talking about, well, enormous sums. Around 300 billion euros, mostly in Europe, and maybe 26 billion pounds in Britain, frozen right after Russia's full-scale invasion. What really jumps out from the material is just how intense the debate is. Very strong opinions, lots of disagreement on the best path forward.
Okay, so let's start with the core proposal that seems to be gaining traction, at least in these sources. The idea of actually seizing that money, the 300 billion euros, the 26 billion pounds, and using it directly for Ukraine, that's a pretty bold move. What's the rationale? How would it work? Well, the proponents, as laid out in the sources, see it serving sort of a dual purpose. First, immediate help, using the money now to fund Ukraine's defense, weapons, ammunition, that sort of thing. But then, maybe even more importantly, they see it as the funding source for rebuilding Ukraine when, hopefully, the fighting stops. The sources talk about it almost like a single stroke action, solving both immediate military needs and long-term reconstruction costs.
And you can really sense the passion behind this in the sources. People like Lee Turner, the former ambassador, talking about needing to get imaginative, find ways to really hurt Russia economically. There's this strong feeling presented that Russia isn't just attacking Ukraine. It's framed as an undeclared war against the West, trying to undermine democracy. And they list these appalling things Russia's accused of, even outside Ukraine: cyber attacks, alleged plots, things in other countries. The argument is Ukraine's fighting for all of us.
That's a key point. The moral argument from this side is really about accountability. Russia committed an appalling act of aggression, an illegal invasion. So they must be held responsible. Figures like Emily Thornberry, the UK MP, and Alexander Misko from Ukraine are quoted saying things like, if Russia isn't stopped in Ukraine, they won't stop there. So using Russia's own frozen money is seen as, well, a just consequence and a practical tool.
Right, but here's the big but, isn't it? If the case seems so strong morally and practically to some, why hasn't it happened? The sources point again and again to the legal hurdles. You have advocates like Thornberry and Misko, both lawyers, the sources note, saying it's completely within international law. But then you also have this acknowledgement that, well, lots of other lawyers disagree. It's a legal wrangle.
Exactly. A wrangle is a good word for it.
Right.
The pro-seizure argument, legally speaking, really hinges on the idea that Russia's invasion was fundamentally illegal under international law. Their view is that because Russia broke that fundamental rule, the rule against aggressive war, they kind of forfeit some of the normal protections that international law gives to state assets. So seizing them to help the victim, Ukraine, becomes justifiable. They point to things like Canadian laws, some U.S. actions, resolutions from the Council of Europe, seeing these as sort of steps or precedents moving in that direction.
Okay, so they see a legal path based on Russia breaking the rules, but if it's so clear to them, what's the actual disagreement about? Why isn't it just, a slam dunk case legally? What makes it so thorny?
Well, that's where the complexity of international law comes in. As one source puts it, you can often find international lawyers arguing both sides. The core tension, really, is between this established principle of state sovereign immunity, basically, that you generally can't just seize another country's stuff, and this growing idea that states must be held responsible for really serious international crimes, like aggression. Applying the existing rules, which maybe weren't perfectly designed for this exact situation, to such a massive act of aggression, it creates genuine room for different legal interpretations. It's not just about the law books. The sources say you have to somehow marry up the law with politics and economics.
Okay, so marrying law, politics, and economics. That leads us straight into the other worries, the non-legal ones. What are the financial people, bankers, central banks concerned about?
Yeah, the big fear there, and the European Central Bank as mentioned is raising this, is the precedent it sets. The worry is that seizing state assets, even from an aggressor, might discourage other regimes or, put off other investors from keeping their money in Western banks down the line. They're concerned it could shake confidence in the whole system, the idea that Western financial institutions are predictable, stable, safe places to park money.
But the sources offer that really blunt counter-argument, which I have to say is quite striking. Well, don't invade your neighbor then.
Yeah, it's very direct, isn't it? The logic is pretty straightforward. If you play by the basic rules, don't launch illegal wars, your assets are safe. The risk only appears if you massively violate international norms. And maybe the thinking is, countries planning invasions probably shouldn't be relying on Western banks anyway. It basically says the need for accountability for aggression should trump the worry about losing potential future deposits from bad actors.
And it stressed this isn't just some technical, legal, or financial puzzle. It's deeply moral and political, too.
Oh, absolutely. It's explicitly called a matter of political will, or sometimes maybe the lack of political will. The sources suggest this might be especially true in some countries that hold a lot of this Russian money. There could be a reluctance, for various reasons, political or economic, to give up these Russian assets. So you have this clash, the moral push to help Ukraine versus maybe other national interests or political calculations.
Okay, moving slightly beyond the asset seizure itself. The sources also talk about other pressures, especially sanctions. What's the main goal there, as described?
The big picture goal for sanctions, according to the sources, is to starve the Russian war machine, cut off the money funding the invasion. And the main way to do that is by hitting their revenue, especially from oil and gas.
Right. And is there more that can be done? The sources seem to think the current sanctions need, well, more teeth.
Yeah, they mentioned needing to tackle Russia's shadow fleet. These are supposedly ships helping Russia get around oil sanctions. And really importantly, they talk about secondary sanctions. That means going after not just Russia, but the countries or companies helping Russia dodge the main sanctions. China, India, and Turkey are named as examples in the source material in this context.
Now, this whole discussion about pressure, sanctions, it also brings up another concern mentioned in the sources, worries about outside influence kind of muddying the waters. There's talk of Russian disinformation, but also something quite specific.
Yes, Alexander Misko, the Ukrainian MP, raises this point. He flags concerns about potential influences, specifically mentioning claims about the Russian envoy, Steve Witkoff. Misko suggests Witkoff has alleged economic or business ties with Russia, calling very concerning and worrisome, and urging an investigation. The specific worry expressed is how this might affect Witkoff's stance on Russia and his relationship with Mr. Putin, especially since he's described as close to and advising Mr. Trump.
Right. The implication being that these alleged connections could potentially influence really important decisions about Ukraine at the highest levels. And this seems to connect to a wider point made, making sure any future deals about Ukraine aren't just seen as business deals, but lead to a real proper agreement, a just and lasting peace. It highlights how complex enforcing accountability is, with potential obstacles like undue influence being part of the picture.
Definitely. And sort of woven through all of this technical and political discussion, you really get a sense from the sources of the human side, the frustration from Ukrainians, obviously, but also the clear admiration expressed for their bravery, their determination, their sheer resolve. That resolve is kind of the foundation for their fight and for all these international efforts trying to support them, despite all these legal, economic, and political challenges we've been talking about. So when you boil it all down, looking at these sources, you see this really stark tension. On one hand, you've got this compelling argument based on justice, on necessity to help Ukraine defend itself and rebuild. But on the other hand, you have these really serious concerns about international law, about precedent, about keeping the global financial system stable and trustworthy. It's not simple. It's a clash of important principles.
Yeah, and it forces you, the listener, to think about how the world should react when established rules are just blatantly broken like this. How do you balance the immediate need to act decisively against aggression with the potential long-term consequences for international norms and economic stability? The sources make it clear there are no easy answers here, just really difficult trade-offs. It definitely leaves you with a lot to chew on regarding the challenges of making international rules stick in today's world.